It had been an ordinary spring afternoon in Millfield, the kind where the breeze carried the scent of tulips and fresh-cut grass. Birds chirped from the backyard oaks, and the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower gave the day its usual suburban rhythm. Claire Whitmore, balancing a glass of lemonade in one hand and a laundry basket in the other, called out from the kitchen doorway, "Abby, honey. Stay where I can see you." Her daughter, 6-year-old Abigail, was twirling near the wooden swing set her father had assembled the previous summer. The sun shimmered in her golden hair, her white sundress catching the light as she spun. Claire smiled. It was one of those brief, golden moments that parents wish they could trap in a bottle, pure, fragile, and deceptively safe. Claire turned away for what couldn't have been more than a minute, maybe two, to put the laundry basket down in the hall. The screen door creaked as it bounced shut behind her. When she returned to the kitchen, her eyes automatically scanned the backyard. The swing set creaked gently in the wind. The plastic toy bucket lay sideways in the sandbox. But Abigail was gone. At first, Claire didn't panic. Maybe she'd run around the side of the house chasing a butterfly or gone to pick flowers like she sometimes did. "Abby," she called out casually, stepping out onto the patio. No answer. Her voice rose a pitch. "Abby." Still no answer. She moved faster now, crossing the lawn, checking behind the bushes, around the side of the house, near the garden gate that led into the front yard. Nothing. A stillness crept into her bones, something ancient and maternal that warned her this was no ordinary game of hide and seek. By the time she reached the front yard, her voice was cracking. "Abigail," she shouted. The neighbor's dog barked in response, but the street was empty. No little girl. No sound of footsteps. No giggles from behind a tree. Within 20 minutes, police cruisers lined the curb in front of the Whitmore home. Yellow tape cordoned off the backyard. Officers fanned out in all directions. Neighbors gathered in small, murmuring clusters on sidewalks. Claire's husband, Mark, rushed home from work, his face pale, his tie hanging askew like he'd ripped it off while speeding down the freeway. Claire stood on the lawn, arms wrapped around herself, shivering despite the warmth of the day. Her eyes were wild with disbelief as she repeated the story again and again to the officers. "I turned away for less than 2 minutes," she said. "She was right there. She was spinning near the swings, right there. And then, she was just gone." The police searched the property first, then the neighborhood. They questioned everyone within a 3-block radius. No one had seen anything. No vehicles out of place. No strange visitors. No sounds. No screams. Just a quiet afternoon that slipped into dusk with no answers. Dogs were brought in the next morning, their handlers grim-faced. The scent trail led them to the back gate, and then nothing. As if Abby had been plucked from the earth and erased. Claire and Mark were interviewed, then interrogated, then quietly watched. Authorities turned their eyes inward, looking for anything suspicious in the parents' lives. But nothing turned up. No history of abuse. No signs of marital strain. No financial troubles. Just 2 parents shattered by something they couldn't explain. The town of Millfield, small and close-knit, was shaken to its core. For weeks afterward, every child was held tighter. Backyard gates were double-locked. Parents no longer let their kids play unsupervised, even for a moment. Flyers with Abby's face, sweet, round, smiling, were plastered on every lamppost. A hotline was set up. Tip after tip came in. All dead ends. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Claire stopped sleeping. She would sit up in Abby's room, clutching her daughter's stuffed unicorn, inhaling its scent like it was the last tether to her child. She refused to move any of Abby's toys. Her toothbrush remained in the bathroom cup, untouched. Her tiny shoes stayed lined by the front door. Mark tried to be strong, for Claire, for himself. He poured himself into work, then into volunteer search efforts. But even as he held her during those tear-drenched nights, something subtle changed in his eyes, like a part of him had been locked away. Some grief, too dark to share, that he didn't have words for. Years passed. The case went cold. New detectives came and went. Leads dried up. Abby's photo aged digitally every birthday, computer-generated portraits offering haunting suggestions of who she might have become. But no one saw her again. No body. No witness. No clue. Until 12 years later. When Claire, rifling through her husband's things, found something hidden inside his old shaving kit that would shake everything she believed. Something she never should have found. The morning after Abigail vanished, the town of Millfield woke to a silence that wasn't natural. The birds still chirped. The wind still rustled the trees. But underneath it all, there was something else, an invisible weight pressing down on everyone's chest. A heaviness of the unknown. Children were kept inside. Parents whispered behind curtains. Doors that were once left unlocked were bolted shut before the sun even set. The local news picked up the story by midday. A missing 6-year-old girl, vanished from her own backyard in broad daylight. Claire and Mark's faces appeared on every TV screen in the region, Claire gaunt and trembling, Mark pale and expressionless beside her. The footage of Abby in her white dress, twirling in a home video, aired on a loop. She was dubbed the Millfield Angel. Detectives from the state were brought in when local authorities ran out of leads. Canvassing expanded to nearby towns. Surveillance footage from surrounding roads and businesses was combed through frame by frame. A possible sighting of a white van was reported. Then a blue sedan. But nothing ever stuck. No license plate. No pattern. No progress. The Whitmore's neighbors, once friendly and warm, grew colder. Not out of malice, but out of fear. The town's sense of security had been shattered. No one wanted to imagine that someone had taken a child from right under their noses. And if they had, then it meant it could happen again. The whispers started within the first week. What if the parents knew more than they were letting on? What if it wasn't a stranger? Rumors spread like wildfire. Claire found herself under an invisible microscope. At the grocery store, people glanced, then quickly looked away. Mark began taking different routes to work, avoiding the stares. Flyers were printed in thousands, stapled to every post, placed on diner windows and convenience store counters. Candlelight vigils were held in front of the school Abby would have attended. At the edge of every gathering, Claire stood silently, a shell of herself, watching strangers light candles for her daughter while she felt herself burning from the inside out. The town changed. Parks emptied. Block parties were cancelled. Trust faded. And for Claire, the world that had once felt so small and safe now felt vast, unpredictable, and cruel. 3 months after the disappearance, a tip from out of state triggered a raid on a trailer home in Ohio. A blurry photo of a blonde girl posted on a message board had been flagged by someone who thought she resembled Abby. The tip turned into a televised event, reporters crowded outside, waiting to announce that she'd been found. But the girl wasn't Abby. She wasn't even missing. Claire watched the news feed from her living room, clutching Abby's dress in her lap. It felt like she was being dragged across broken glass every time she got her hopes up. She stopped watching the news after that. A year passed. The case made the national circuit. Crime shows, podcasts, even daytime talk shows discussed the backyard disappearance. Experts debated abduction timelines. Former FBI agents hypothesized about child trafficking, rogue relatives, or silent serial predators. Everyone had an opinion. No one had a clue. The police stopped coming by so often. The community fund dried up. A memorial plaque was placed at the elementary school playground in Abby's name. Mark didn't attend the ceremony. Claire stood there alone, watching other parents hug their children while she stood with nothing but a name engraved in stone. The house became a monument to the past. Claire refused to move. Abby's room remained untouched, down to the crayon drawings on the walls and the half-finished puzzle on the floor. Mark tried to get her to take a break, suggested a vacation, or even just a drive out of town, but Claire wouldn't leave. She said she couldn't. Not while Abby was still out there. As more time passed, the phone calls slowed. The sympathy dried up. People moved on. Claire couldn't. The marriage began to strain under the weight of the unanswered questions. Mark grew quiet. Distant. He buried himself in work, often coming home late, sometimes not at all. Claire, in turn, clung harder to the past. Their grief became separate islands, no longer connected by shared pain, but divided by it. By the 5th anniversary of Abby's disappearance, Millfield had largely returned to its old rhythm. New families had moved in. New kids played on the same swing set in the park where Abby once laughed. But for Claire, every creak of a swing, every bark of a neighbor's dog, every quiet second still echoed with her daughter's name. 12 years is a long time. Long enough for wounds to scab over, for photos to yellow, for people to forget the details. But Claire never forgot. And when she found herself alone one rainy evening, looking for batteries in the hall closet, she knocked over an old box. It spilled onto the floor. Inside was Mark's old shaving kit, one he hadn't used in years. She almost tossed it back into the box, until she noticed the zipper on the inside flap. A part she'd never seen before. Curious, she tugged it open. Inside was a photograph. Faded. Slightly torn. But the face was unmistakable. It was Abby. Older. Maybe 8 or 9. And standing behind her in the photo, his hand on her shoulder, was someone Claire had seen every day for the last 20 years. Her husband. Claire's fingers trembled as she held the photo. The edges were worn, the image slightly faded, but there was no mistaking what she was seeing. Abby, older, not the wide-eyed 6-year-old she remembered, but a child closer to 9, maybe 10. Her hair longer, her face sharper with age, but those eyes, they were the same. Claire would recognize them anywhere. And behind her, smiling faintly, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, was Mark. She stared at it for what felt like hours, her brain spinning in chaotic spirals trying to catch up with her eyes. The room blurred. Her ears rang. She sank to the floor without realizing it, the shaving kit forgotten beside her, the rain tapping against the windows like a clock ticking towards something inevitable. Claire knew she hadn't seen that photo before. Not in a frame, not in a drawer, not in any of the albums they'd sifted through for years. So why was it hidden? Why was it zipped away in a pocket inside a long-forgotten shaving kit? When Mark came home that night, soaked from the rain and silent as usual, Claire didn't confront him. Not yet. She watched him carefully, how he moved, how he avoided her gaze, how he said nothing about her red eyes or the way she'd forgotten to cook dinner. That night, she lay in bed beside him, wide-eyed, heart pounding, the photo hidden beneath her pillow. The next morning, after Mark left for work, Claire drove straight to the police station. Detective Laramie, who had once led the investigation into Abby's disappearance before it was declared cold, was long gone, retired and living somewhere in Arizona. The new detective, younger and unfamiliar with the case, took the photo, studied it, and asked if she was certain it was Abigail. Absolutely, Claire said, her voice thin but certain. And that's her father with her. The detective asked if the photo could be faked. Claire shook her head. This isn't edited. This isn't some prank. It was hidden. In something he never should have kept. The department reopened the file, reluctantly. It had been over a decade. People had changed, leads had vanished, and the public had moved on. But now, there was something new, tangible. A photograph. Mark was called in for questioning 3 days later. He didn't seem shocked when the police contacted him, didn't resist. He sat in the interview room, stoic, staring at the photo in silence for nearly 10 full minutes before speaking. "I don't know what that is," he finally said. "I've never seen it before." The detective raised an eyebrow. "You're saying this isn't you?" Mark didn't flinch. "It looks like me. But I don't remember this. I didn't take that photo." When asked how the picture ended up in his old shaving kit, he claimed no idea. "That kit's been buried in the back of the closet for years," he said. "I haven't used it since we moved." Claire sat behind the two-way mirror, watching. Her hands balled into fists, her throat dry. She didn't know what answer she wanted him to give. Denial meant deception, but confession would be worse. Would mean the man she'd slept beside, mourned with, trusted, was a liar. Or worse. The photo was sent to a forensic lab for authentication. Meanwhile, detectives pulled the original files, old statements, timelines, tips, and interview transcripts. They scrutinized everything again. And what they found was, nothing new. Mark's alibi the day Abby vanished had always been airtight. He'd been in a board meeting across town. Surveillance cameras. Dozens of witnesses. Phone logs. There was no evidence he had left or returned to the house during the crucial time. But that was 12 years ago. The photo showed a girl older than 6, meaning if it was real, Abby had been alive after the day she vanished. Which introduced new, darker questions. Had she been taken, but not by a stranger? Had she been hidden? The theories came flooding back, old ones, new ones, some unthinkable. One theory was that Mark had help, someone close to the family, maybe even a relative. Someone who could have waited for Claire to go inside and then opened the gate, coaxed Abby out. Someone she trusted. Another theory, darker still, was that Claire had suffered some kind of mental break. That perhaps she had repressed something, maybe even hurt Abby herself, and the photo was part of a cruel hoax to dredge it all up again. Then came the third theory. The most chilling. What if Abby hadn't been taken at all? What if she had left? The idea seemed absurd. No 6-year-old would willingly disappear. But what if she hadn't been alone? What if someone coaxed her out of the yard with promises, candy, puppies, adventure, or worse? And what if that someone wasn't a stranger at all? The community buzzed again. Word spread that the case had reopened. Old wounds tore open. The press came sniffing back into town. Reporters knocked on Claire's door, left messages, stalked the police station. Everyone wanted to know the same thing: why was there a photo of a missing girl, years older than when she vanished, in her father's possession? Claire refused to speak to the media. She spent most of her time rereading every file, every document, every memory she could unearth. She dug through boxes of Abby's old things. Notebooks. Crayon drawings. Birthday cards. She searched for any clue, any mention, any detail she might have missed. Then, deep in the back of Abby's closet, she found something she didn't remember seeing before. A small, white notebook, one Abby used to scribble in. But inside, written in a neat, childlike hand, were a series of names. Most she recognized, classmates, cousins, neighbors. But one name, written 3 times on the last page, stood out. Mr. Jack. There was no Mr. Jack in Claire's memory. Not a teacher, not a relative, not a friend. She had no idea who that was. But Abby did. And somehow, Claire knew, he might be the key to everything. The name Mr. Jack hung in Claire's mind like a splinter, sharp, irritating, impossible to ignore. She stared at the childlike scrawl, written 3 times in the notebook's final page, underlined once in red crayon. That was Abby's handwriting. She was sure of it. Claire remembered how her daughter used to press too hard with crayons, the way the letters would dent the next few pages. She flipped through the rest of the notebook. Most of it was innocent nonsense, stick figures, imaginary animals, doodles of flowers, half-spelled sentences. But there were a few drawings that made Claire's stomach churn. One showed a tall man beside a small girl, drawn in black crayon. The man had no eyes, just hollow circles. Another showed what looked like a house in the woods. Claire had never seen Abby draw that before. Their own home looked nothing like it. She took photos of the pages and brought the notebook to the detective the next day. He examined it quietly, made a copy, and promised to run the name Mr. Jack through every registry they had access to. But Claire could tell from his tone, he didn't believe it was anything more than a child's imaginary friend. She disagreed. Grief plays tricks on people. It molds time, bends memory, twists logic. Claire had experienced all of it. In the early years after Abby's disappearance, she'd heard her daughter's voice echoing down the hallway in the dead of night. She'd seen flashes of blonde hair outside the kitchen window, only to open the door and find nothing but wind and empty air. There were nights she'd wake from vivid dreams where Abby came home, older, confused, safe. And every morning, the pain of waking up was like losing her all over again. Claire had gone to therapy. For a while, she even tried medication. But nothing dulled the ache. Nothing could. People told her to move on. That she had to find a way to live again. But Claire had refused. How do you live without the one person who made life make sense? Mark had tried to cope in his own way. He returned to work after 3 weeks. Claire couldn't. She left her job at the library permanently. Couldn't bear to walk through the children's section again. Couldn't bear the smell of storybooks or the sound of little feet on tile. Friends dropped away. At first, they came by with casseroles and long hugs. They offered help, shoulders, ears. But slowly, they stopped calling. Stopped visiting. Grief made people uncomfortable. Claire understood that now. It didn't go away. It just sat there, like a heavy suitcase you're never allowed to put down. Her own parents, distant to begin with, faded into near silence. Only Mark's sister, Elaine, stayed in touch regularly, offering check-ins, bringing groceries, trying her best to help without being intrusive. Claire had clung to her once. But even Elaine eventually started pulling back, especially after year 5. Now, 12 years later, Claire realized how isolated she'd become. The house had become a mausoleum. Every room still whispered with Abby's laughter, frozen in time. Her toothbrush, her tiny shoes, her drawings on the fridge, none of it had moved. Mark had grown frustrated years ago, tried to clean some of it up, to put the past in boxes. But Claire refused. Because to box it up meant admitting Abby wasn't coming back. And yet, now, there was proof. A photo. A name. A possibility. It should have made Claire feel hopeful. Instead, it cracked her open in places she thought had scarred over. Because if Abby had been alive, if she'd been somewhere, then Claire had been living in agony for nothing. Years wasted in mourning, while her daughter might have been somewhere, needing her. She began to question everything. The timeline. The investigation. Even herself. Late one night, unable to sleep, Claire opened a locked drawer in the bedroom she hadn't touched in years. Inside were transcripts, copies of the police interviews from the first few days after Abby vanished. She read them all again, carefully this time. One detail stood out. A neighbor, Mrs. Denning, had mentioned seeing a man she didn't recognize near the Whitmore's backyard that morning. He was tall, wearing a blue jacket and sunglasses. He was walking a dog. Except no one else on the street had seen him. Police had chalked it up to mistaken identity. Probably a new neighbor or a landscaper. But what if it wasn't? Claire drove over to the Dennings' house the next morning. The woman who answered the door was younger, mid-30s, a new owner. The original Mrs. Denning had passed away 4 years ago. Another dead end. That afternoon, Claire went through the storage boxes in the attic. She found old photo albums, Abby's preschool crafts, and a cardboard box labeled Mark's office. Inside were files from his old job, miscellaneous papers, and at the bottom, a plain black notebook. She opened it, expecting work notes. Instead, she found maps. Hand-drawn sketches of wooded areas. Coordinates. Trails. Some were familiar, parks near Millfield. Others were remote. The pages were filled with notes, some in hurried, smudged writing. Cleared, no sign. Too open. Try again next week. Claire's breath caught. Mark had been searching. All these years, he'd told her nothing. Said it hurt too much to talk about Abby. That there was nothing left to find. But this notebook said otherwise. He had been going out, into the woods, into trails they'd never mentioned to police. Why? She placed the notebook beside the photograph. 2 artifacts of a story she'd never been told. And now, more than ever, Claire wasn't sure whether Mark had been hiding something out of guilt, shame, or love. That night, she waited for him to come home. She had questions now. And she would demand answers. Mark arrived home later than usual, his hair damp from a late drizzle, the air thick with the smell of earth and engine oil. Claire was waiting for him in the kitchen, sitting perfectly still at the table, the black notebook and the photograph laid side by side in front of her. She didn't speak when he stepped through the door. She didn't need to. Mark paused in the doorway, his eyes flickering to the table, then to her face. He didn't ask what those things were. He just stood there, rainwater dripping from his collar, his face unreadable. "How long have you been looking?" Claire finally asked, her voice raw but steady. Mark didn't answer right away. He set his keys down on the counter and leaned against the fridge. "Since the 2nd year," he said. "I couldn't sit still anymore. I had to do something." Claire's heart pounded. "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked at her, tired eyes lined with something like guilt. "Because you were breaking. Every day. Every minute. I didn't want to give you hope if it led nowhere. You lied to me." "I didn't lie," he said softly. "I just didn't share. There's a difference." Claire stared at him, the fury building behind her ribs. "Don't do that, Mark. Don't twist words like that matters. All these years, I thought you gave up." "I never gave up." "Then who is Mr. Jack?" she snapped, sliding the notebook across the table. "Abby wrote his name over and over." "You never mentioned him." "Why?" Mark furrowed his brow and picked up the notebook, flipping through the pages. He shook his head. "I don't know who that is." "Think harder," Claire hissed. She drew him. She drew a man with no eyes. She drew a house in the woods. She didn't make that up. "I swear to you, Claire. I've never heard that name before." His voice was calm, but there was a tremor in it, the kind that comes from exhaustion, not just of the body, but of carrying something heavy for too long. Claire stood up abruptly and stormed into the living room. "Then explain this," she shouted, holding up the photograph. "This is you. That's our daughter. And she's not 6 in that picture. She's older. So where were you? What did you do? Did you find her? Did someone send this to you? What is this?" Mark walked over slowly, took the photo, and stared at it as if seeing it for the first time. "I don't know," he whispered. "I don't remember this picture." Claire stepped closer. "Are you telling me someone planted this in your bag? That it's some elaborate hoax after 12 years? I'm telling you I didn't take this photo. But I think," he swallowed. "I think someone wanted us to find it. They stood in silence. Claire's arms were shaking, the weight of years crashing into this single moment. All the unspoken grief, all the fights, the nights spent sleeping back to back, the mornings without a word exchanged, they had all led here. Mark finally sat down, hands pressed against his forehead. "I followed leads," he said. "A woman in Westfield thought she saw a girl who looked like Abby 3 years ago. I went. Talked to the girl. It wasn't her. I didn't tell you because every time I got your hopes up, you'd fall apart again." "You should have let me fall apart," Claire said, her voice soft now. "I deserved the truth." He looked up at her, tears welling in his eyes for the first time in years. "I was trying to keep what was left of us together." Claire sat beside him, not out of forgiveness, but out of sheer exhaustion. They were two people standing in the ashes of the life they once had. And for the first time in a very long time, they were both staring at the same fire. They didn't speak for a while. The rain ticked against the windows. The house, always too quiet, now felt alive again, crackling with something new. Not hope, but movement. The next morning, Claire called Elaine, Mark's sister. She hadn't spoken to her in months. They met at a coffee shop, and Claire wasted no time showing her the photograph and the notebook. Elaine looked pale as she examined them. "This is real?" she asked. Claire nodded. "You saw Mark a lot back then. Did he ever mention Mr. Jack?" Elaine thought hard, then slowly shook her head. "No. But what? I remember once, years ago, we were talking about Abby. I asked if he thought she was gone. He didn't answer. Just looked at me and said, 'There are places people can hide. Places no one looks.' I thought he meant it metaphorically. I didn't press." Claire leaned forward. "Do you think he knew something? I think Mark's not lying when he says he didn't take that photo. But I also think someone wanted him to find it." Claire clutched her coffee cup tightly. "Then why now? Why 12 years later?" Elaine hesitated, then asked, "Have you ever looked through his old emails?" Claire blinked. "No. Why would I?" Elaine's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because maybe the answers aren't buried in the woods. Maybe they're sitting on his laptop." That night, after Mark fell asleep on the couch, Claire crept upstairs and opened his computer. The login was the same as it had always been. She opened the email client. And there, buried among old spam and unread newsletters, was one subject line that chilled her. "Still alive. Still waiting. Mr. Jack." The email had no body text. Only an image attachment. Claire clicked it. It was Abby. Older now. At least 16. Standing in front of a wooden shack in the woods. And this time, she wasn't smiling. Claire stared at the screen, her breath caught somewhere between her chest and throat. Abby's face stared back at her, older, but unmistakable. Her blonde hair was longer, tangled. Her clothes looked worn, almost rural, like something a child would wear at a cabin in the woods. But it wasn't the outfit or the setting that unnerved Claire the most. It was Abby's eyes. They weren't pleading. They weren't joyful. They were hollow. Wide open, vacant, as if she were physically present but emotionally gone. Claire's hand hovered over the mouse. She right-clicked and saved the image to a flash drive, then scanned the inbox. The email had been sent from an encrypted address, untraceable. It was dated 2 weeks ago. Just 2 weeks. Which meant someone out there had been watching. Waiting. Deciding when to pull the string. She backed out of the email and opened Mark's deleted folder. There were more. 9 deleted emails in total, spaced out over the last year. All from the same address. All cryptic. Some had attachments. One read. "She asked about you today." Another. You don't deserve to see her, but I'm giving you the choice. Claire's fingers curled into fists. Why hadn't Mark told her? Why had he hidden this? She copied everything to the flash drive and returned the laptop exactly as she'd found it. Then she tiptoed back downstairs, heart pounding, and stood over Mark where he lay asleep on the couch. His breathing was deep. Peaceful. Like he wasn't sitting on top of a secret that could burn their lives to the ground. The next morning, Claire didn't confront him. She drove straight to the police. Detective Reynolds looked like he hadn't slept in days when she showed him the emails. "We'll run them through cybercrime," he said. "Try to get a trace on the IP. If this guy's been emailing your husband, maybe we can narrow down his location." Claire leaned in. "Why send the photos to Mark and not to me?" Reynolds didn't have an answer. But they both knew what it meant. Whoever Mr. Jack was, he wasn't just a stranger. He knew them. He knew Mark. He'd known where to send the photo, how to reach him, and how to stay invisible. Claire went home and waited. Mark returned around 5. He looked tired, distracted. She studied him like a stranger, trying to read the lines of his face for answers he wasn't offering. Finally, she asked quietly, "Where were you today?" He flinched slightly. "Work." Claire stared at him. "The truth." Mark sighed, ran a hand through his hair, and sat down at the table. "I went to the old trailhead near Langston Hollow." Claire's stomach dropped. "Why?" "Because, someone left a package there last week. Wrapped in plastic. It was for me." "What was in it?" "A note. A map. A burner phone. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to drag you into something dangerous." Claire felt like the ground beneath her was slipping. "So you've been communicating with him?" Mark didn't answer immediately. "Not directly. But yes. Sort of. He sends things. I follow. I leave things. He takes them. It's a game. You should have told the police." "I know. I didn't want to risk losing her again." Claire stood there, shaking. "You never had her, Mark. That's the point. You don't know what he's doing to her. And you're playing along." He stood too, voice rising. "What do you want me to say, Claire? That I'm a coward? That I was desperate? That I thought if I played his game long enough, I might see her again? Fine. I am. I was. But I didn't want you in this because I couldn't bear the thought of you being hurt if it went wrong." Claire's voice dropped to a whisper. "She's our daughter." Mark's expression cracked then, his anger crumbling into a raw, childlike sorrow. "I never stopped loving her. I never stopped looking. But this is something bigger than I understand. Whoever he is, he's always been one step ahead." Claire turned away, tears in her eyes. "Not anymore." That night, she opened the photo of Abby again. Zoomed in. Something was behind her, etched into the wood of the shack door. A carved symbol. A jagged, repeating triangle over a circle. It looked familiar. She ran an image search online, and after an hour of combing through cult symbols, graffiti tags, and local folklore, she found a match. A small private hiking group had once reported a series of strange symbols carved into trees in the Blackstone Woodlands, an overgrown, remote region 2 hours north of Millfield. The area had long been abandoned due to harsh conditions and poor accessibility. A known spot for illegal hunting. A place no one paid much attention to. It was also the same forest that Mark had visited multiple times according to the maps in his black notebook. Claire didn't tell him her plan. She packed a backpack, printed copies of the symbol, the photos, and the notebook pages. She called Elaine and told her where she'd be going the next morning. If Claire was going to find Abby, it wouldn't be from the comfort of a police station. It would be in the woods, where Mr. Jack had been hiding all along. Claire hit the trailhead just after dawn, the rising sun filtering through the canopy like slivers of gold. The woods were dense, damp, and eerily quiet, no birdsong, no wind, only the crunch of pine needles beneath her boots. The Blackstone woodlands had always been avoided by hikers and campers alike, thanks to its overgrown terrain and old local rumors, strange sightings, missing animals, unearthed traps. But Claire didn't care about ghost stories. She only cared about one thing, her daughter. The deeper she moved into the woods, the more removed the world felt, like civilization had been stripped away with every step. She carried only what she needed. A flashlight, a pocketknife, the printed photos and map, 2 bottles of water, and a burner phone the police had given her in case she spotted anything or anyone. It had no GPS, but Detective Reynolds had promised it was being monitored for any signal flare or distress call. About 2 miles in, she spotted it. A tree marked with the same triangle over circle symbol from the photograph, faint but still visible, like it had been carved years ago and left to fade with time. She stopped, pressed her hand to the bark. This wasn't random. Someone had left this here. A breadcrumb. She kept moving. By mile 4, the terrain shifted. Less like a trail, more like forgotten earth. The trees here grew denser, strangled together, branches like twisted fingers reaching across the narrow path. The sun vanished beneath the canopy. It felt like dusk, even though it was barely 9 in the morning. Claire rounded a bend and froze. There, partially hidden by vines and a collapsed pine, was a small wooden shack. Just like in the photo. It was smaller than she expected. Weathered. Half sunken into the soil. The planks were gray, warped with age. The door hung crooked on one hinge. A rusted padlock sat broken on the ground. She stepped closer, each footfall echoing too loudly in her ears. The carved symbol was there on the door, deep and deliberate. Claire reached for the handle and pulled. The inside was dark, but not empty. Dust motes danced in a single beam of light from a narrow crack in the roof. Against the far wall, under a rotted blanket, was a pile of books. Children's books. Some faded, some water-damaged. Charlotte's Web. Goodnight Moon. Where the Wild Things Are. Claire's heart cracked. A girl had lived here. There was a mattress on the floor. Moldy, sunken. A small desk with broken crayons scattered across the top. A mirror, cracked down the center, reflecting a warped version of herself as she stepped inside. Claire's voice trembled as she called out, "Abby." Silence. She opened the desk drawer. Inside was a spiral notebook, the cover torn. She opened it slowly. The first page simply said, "My name is Abigail Whitmore." Claire dropped to her knees. Her fingers trembled as she turned the pages. Each one was dated. Journal entries, written in careful, unsure handwriting that gradually matured. The entries weren't every day, but enough to piece together a timeline. Mr. Jack brought me here. He said my parents didn't want me anymore. He gets angry when I ask about home. I dream about my mom's hands. They smell like soap and flowers. Sometimes I hear a car. He says if I try to run, I'll disappear for real. Claire read until her eyes were too blurry with tears to continue. Her fingers curled around the journal like it was a piece of Abby's soul. Suddenly, a sound. Outside. Leaves crunching. Footsteps. Claire's spine stiffened. She backed into the corner of the shack, clutching the notebook like a shield. She pulled the burner phone from her pocket, pressed the emergency signal button, and shoved it into her bag. The door creaked. Someone stepped in. Tall. Lean. Wearing a dark green jacket. A hood covered most of his face, but when he turned, Claire caught the glint of sharp blue eyes. She knew those eyes. The man stared at her, expression unreadable. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. Claire's voice shook. "Where's my daughter?" He tilted his head. "You should have stayed home." "I am home," she snapped. "Where is she?" The man stepped forward. "She's safe. She's better off without." Claire lunged, swinging the flashlight with both hands. It struck his shoulder and he staggered back, grabbing at her arm. She kicked wildly, screaming, until he pushed her away and vanished through the trees. She stumbled after him, but the woods swallowed him quickly. He was gone. Within minutes, sirens echoed in the distance. Police helicopters swarmed overhead. Claire waved until they spotted her and descended through the trees. Within the hour, the shack was surrounded. Officers with dogs, search teams, forensic units, all combing through the structure. They found a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside were bundles of photographs, some of Abby, others of different children. None identified. Some recent. Some very, very old. But there was no sign of Abby. Just the journal. The books. Her name. Her voice, preserved on paper. Claire gave her full statement to police. Every detail. Every page of the notebook was taken as evidence. The man in the shack, Mr. Jack, was now the center of a manhunt stretching across 3 counties. Mark was called to the station that evening. He sat across from Claire in stunned silence as she told him everything. She finally said, "You knew more than you admitted. But you didn't know this." Mark nodded slowly. "No. I didn't." The detective stepped in with new information. The notebook was real. The timeline matches. "We're working on DNA from the mattress." "But Claire, if she was there, she's not anymore." Claire looked up, her eyes hardened. "Then we keep going." Because for the first time in 12 years, Abby had left a trail. And her mother was following it. The house felt colder now. Not just physically, though the late autumn wind clawed at the windows, but spiritually, like something had been disturbed that was never meant to resurface. Claire moved through it like a woman possessed, her eyes scanning every detail of the life she'd built and buried over the last 12 years. The shack had confirmed one thing: Abby had been alive, at least for a time. And the man who held her, the man calling himself Mr. Jack, was still out there. And then there was the photograph. The one Claire had found in Mark's old shaving kit. It still haunted her. Why had he kept it? That question refused to leave her alone. So that night, after Mark had gone upstairs to shower, she went back into the hall closet. She opened the same box she had knocked over the first time. There were a few more of his belongings inside. Old receipts, a cracked watch, a tie still stained with wine. She picked up the shaving kit again, running her fingers along its edges. She opened the flap, then turned it inside out, looking for anything she might have missed. And then, click. A small compartment at the base of the kit popped loose. Claire's breath caught. She carefully peeled it open. Inside was a USB drive. She froze. How long had it been there? Had Mark known? Or had he forgotten it, stashed away during the chaos of those early days? Claire took the drive and slipped it into her pocket. Upstairs, the shower stopped. Water drained. The pipes groaned like an old man clearing his throat. She waited until she heard Mark's footsteps in the bedroom, then slipped into the office and powered up her old laptop. The USB mounted immediately. There were 5 files. All videos. All time-stamped between 8 and 11 years ago. Claire hesitated only a moment before double-clicking the first one. It was dark. Grainy. A camera, clearly hidden, positioned in a corner. Then, movement. A child stepped into view. Claire's heart stopped. It was Abby. Older than when she'd vanished. Maybe 7, maybe 8. Her hair was longer. Her face thinner. She wore a simple dress, faded pink. She sat down at a small desk and began drawing. Her expression was flat. Calm. But not playful. Not joyful. Just, robotic. Claire's hand clamped over her mouth. The second video showed the same room, more of a cabin than a cell. Abby again, this time standing beside a man just out of frame. His voice was soft, too low to make out, but his hand reached into frame and placed a bowl in front of her. She nodded. Saturday. 8. No resistance. No sound. Claire watched all 5 videos. They spanned roughly a year. Each one subtly different, Abby growing slightly older, the lighting changing with the seasons. But one thing remained constant, her silence. The last clip was dated nearly a year before the first email Mark had received. And that raised the next question. Had he watched these? She copied the videos onto her laptop, then returned the USB to the shaving kit and closed everything as it was. She needed to think. Confrontation wouldn't help, not yet. Mark had proven he would withhold the truth if he thought it spared pain. But now she had more than a trail. She had proof. The next day, she took the videos to Detective Reynolds. His face paled as he watched them. "We've been dealing with theory and possibility," he said quietly. "But this is solid. This man was documenting her. Keeping records. Maybe even for years." Claire sat rigid. "He's not just some kidnapper. He thinks he owns her." Reynolds nodded slowly. "And he's careful. These clips were never posted. No signatures, no audio identifiers. This guy knew what he was doing. Then we find someone who knows him." And that's when Claire remembered something else. A day, years ago, before Abby disappeared. When Mark had come home from work with a story about a strange man who had been hanging around the parking garage at his office. "Guy gave me the creeps," he'd said, pouring coffee. "Kept asking me if I needed help carrying my briefcase. Wouldn't stop smiling." At the time, they'd laughed it off. But now? Claire called Mark's old office. The manager who answered confirmed that there had been complaints, back in 2012, about a man loitering near the employee lot. Police had been called, but the man had vanished before they arrived. He'd claimed to be a maintenance contractor, but no one could verify his name. The name he gave? Jack Bellinger. Claire wrote it down with shaking hands. Finally, a real name. Detective Reynolds wasted no time. He ordered a full records pull. Within hours, they found a few threads. Jack Bellinger, who had worked short-term gigs across the state, carpentry, groundskeeping, short-stint maintenance work at churches, schools, even private homes. Always under a different variation: J. Bellinger, Jake B., John Bell. No social media. No fixed address. No family on record. But he had a past. And one of his last known jobs. A church retreat cabin in the Blackstone woodlands. The very area where Claire had found the shack. It was there they found the final breadcrumb. A second cabin, hidden deeper in the forest, even more remote. Abandoned. Inside, burned remains of clothing, melted plastic. Signs of something recently destroyed in a hurry. But what mattered most was the lockbox buried under the floorboards. Inside, a photo. Abby. Now fully grown. 17. Eyes hollow. Staring straight at the lens. And beside her, a note scrawled in pen. "She's not yours anymore." Claire collapsed to her knees. Her daughter was still alive. But for how long? And where had he taken her now? The photo from the lockbox haunted Claire's dreams. Abby, now almost an adult, sat stiffly on a wooden chair. Her expression hadn't changed much from the earlier videos, still hollow, still eerily quiet. But there was something else in her eyes now. A new layer. Not confusion. Not fear. Resignation. "She's not yours anymore." The words on the note had been scribbled like a dare. Claire read them over and over again, trying to find meaning. But they said only what they meant, that Abby was still being held. That Mr. Jack wasn't finished. And she knew now, this wasn't about ransom. It wasn't about abuse in the traditional sense. It was about possession. Control. Over Abby. Over them all. Within days, the investigation around Jack Bellinger exploded. The media caught on. National headlines flashed. Mother of missing girl finds disturbing videos in husband's shaving kit. Suspect identified in 12-year-old cold case. New sighting suggests teen may still be alive. Claire became both a public figure and a symbol. A mother who never gave up, and now, a witness with evidence that could bring her daughter home. The pressure mounted on law enforcement. Tips flooded in from across the state. But it was one call, made to a small sheriff's station in northern Maine, that changed everything. A hiker had passed through a remote stretch of forest land near the Canadian border. He'd stopped at a gas station just before crossing out of cell range and told the clerk about a strange man he'd encountered, tall, wearing camouflage, guiding a young girl who looked way too thin to be out there. When he asked if they were okay, the man had simply smiled and said, "We like the quiet." The clerk didn't think much of it, until he saw the news. He called it in. The sheriff's department relayed the report to Detective Reynolds, who immediately brought Claire in to review the footage from the gas station's outdoor camera. The footage was blurry. The time stamp was 3 days old. But there they were. A man. Hooded, his back mostly to the camera, and a girl, walking stiffly, her head down. She wore a long coat. Her hair was tucked into a beanie. But even beneath the grainy pixels, Claire gasped. She knew her child. "That's Abby," she whispered. Reynolds nodded grimly. "And that's him." Now they had a direction. Search teams were dispatched to Maine within hours. Helicopters. Drones. Canine units. The terrain was brutal, mountainous, cold, littered with old logging roads. But something told Claire they were close. In the meantime, the FBI dug deeper into Jack Bellinger's past. What they uncovered only added to the horror. His real name wasn't Jack. It was Benjamin Kessler. A former child welfare worker. He'd been fired from a Midwestern social services office years ago under sealed circumstances, allegations of inappropriate behavior, records gone missing, children placed in questionable homes. But no charges were filed. No one wanted the scandal. Kessler disappeared from public view in 2009. That was the same year Abby vanished. It explained how he knew the system. How to hide. How to manipulate. And most chillingly, it explained how he'd chosen her. Claire's stomach turned as the pieces fell into place. He hadn't just randomly plucked Abby from the backyard. He watched her. Studied her. Maybe even met her before. The journal entries suddenly made more sense, the strange man at the park, the questions Abby had started asking about people she didn't know. Claire felt the bile rise. This wasn't a crime of impulse. It had been planned. Meticulously. She started revisiting old footage, looking for any overlooked moments. In one home video, Abby's 5th birthday, Claire noticed something she'd never seen before. A man, standing in the background at the edge of the yard. Holding a camera. Not part of the party. Not anyone they knew. He never approached. He just stood there, blending in, smiling. Claire's hands shook. She paused the frame, zoomed in. It was him. Benjamin Kessler had been in their lives long before they knew his name. The investigators confirmed it using facial recognition. Same jawline, same ears, same eyes. The fact that he was there, at a child's birthday party, sent shockwaves through the team. But it also narrowed the timeline. This wasn't a kidnapping born out of randomness. It had been years in the making. Meanwhile, the manhunt in Maine intensified. The terrain was treacherous, and winter was closing in. But then, a break. A wildlife drone, deployed to monitor elk populations, accidentally caught heat signatures in an off-trail area of forest near the Canadian border. 2 figures. One tall. One smaller. Both moving slowly. Claire was on the phone with Reynolds when the call came in. He turned to her, his voice sharper than she'd ever heard it. "We found them. Or at least, we think we did." A strike team was mobilized. Quietly. No media. No sirens. Just boots on the ground and eyes in the sky. Claire waited by the phone. Hours passed. Her nails were bitten raw. Mark sat across from her, hollow-eyed, pale. Neither of them spoke. Then, just after midnight, her phone rang. "Reynolds. We found the site," he said. It was empty. But recently vacated. Fire still warm. Claire's chest deflated. "But we recovered items. Clothing. A blanket. A drawing." Her pulse ticked. He continued, voice lower now. "We also found boot prints. 2 sets. Leading north. Toward the border." Claire swallowed. "Then they're still running." "They're close," he said. "We're not stopping. Not now." As she hung up, Claire looked at the wall of photos she'd built in the living room, Abby's face across the years. From the 6-year-old in pigtails, to the 10-year-old in the photo, to the teenager in the videos, to the young woman in the last image found in the cabin. And though fear filled her, something else did too. Resolve. Because Abby wasn't just waiting to be saved. She was surviving. And Claire would do whatever it took to bring her home. The border between northern Maine and Canada stretched wide, desolate, and wild, marked not by fences or flashing signs, but by endless forest and forgotten logging trails. It was here, in this no-man's land of pine and ice, that Benjamin Kessler, once known as Jack, was running. And somewhere beside him, after 12 harrowing years, was Abby. The trail was faint but unmistakable. Agents tracked the boot prints over moss and frozen leaves, through shallow snow, past overturned rocks that revealed hasty footprints. Every so often, they found scraps, a strip of fabric snagged on a branch, an empty food wrapper, even a girl's hair tie, blue, plastic, like something from a child's drawer. Claire had been forbidden to join the search directly. But she stayed just south of the staging zone, a small ranger outpost near the border. For 3 sleepless days and nights, she sat by the radio, the burner phone clutched in her hand, jumping at every voice transmission that crackled through the static. On the 4th day, just before sunrise, she received a call from Reynolds. They found something. Claire gripped the phone harder. "Abby?" "Not yet. But close." An abandoned hunting cabin had been discovered just half a mile from the border. Inside, a small campfire, a makeshift bed of old coats, and in the corner, a shoe. Claire recognized it immediately from the photos. It was Abby's. And more than that, tucked inside it was a note, scribbled in a rush on the back of a newspaper. It read. "He's scared. He keeps saying they're coming. I think he's losing control. If you find this, please keep looking. I'm trying." Claire collapsed into a chair, the paper shaking in her hands. Abby had written it. Not 12 years ago, now. She was alive, aware, and trying to escape. "She's not just surviving," Reynolds said, when he called her back. She's resisting. The search teams changed tactics. No longer just tracking, they began anticipating. If Abby was trying to run, she wouldn't stick to trails. She'd choose danger over capture. They scouted cliffs, water crossings, even bear dens. Then, at dusk on the fifth day, a hunter's drone picked up thermal signatures deep in a hollow near Bearskin Lake. 2 people. One lying down. The other pacing. No campfire this time. Just raw cold. The team deployed immediately, quiet and fast. When they arrived at the hollow, they moved in with infrared goggles and muffled radios. A figure bolted from a makeshift lean-to, darting into the trees. He moved fast, wild, like an animal who'd finally realized the cage was closing. But the agents didn't chase him. Because inside the lean-to, curled beneath layers of coats, was a girl. Small. Pale. And alive. Abby. Claire arrived at the ranger station just minutes before the helicopter touched down. The wind from the rotors kicked up snow and gravel, and Claire pushed through the gusts, eyes fixed on the stretcher. Paramedics swarmed, and for a moment, she thought they wouldn't let her through, but then she heard it. A voice. Weak. Raspy. Barely more than a whisper. Mom. Claire's legs buckled as she reached her daughter. Abby's face was thinner than she remembered. Her hair was matted. Her lips cracked. But those eyes, those soft, gray eyes, were hers. She touched her face, brushing aside a strand of hair. Abby, it's me. I'm here. Tears streamed down the girl's cheeks as her lips trembled. You came. I never stopped. The medics moved them quickly into the station. Abby was in shock, cold, malnourished, but responsive. She clutched Claire's hand the entire time, as if letting go meant being swept back into the dark. Later, in a quiet room wrapped in blankets, Abby began to talk. He told me you didn't want me, she whispered. Said you gave me away. Claire's heart shattered. That's not true. You were taken. I know now, Abby said. I didn't believe him anymore. Not for a long time. Claire hugged her gently, afraid to press too hard. Did he hurt you? Abby paused, then nodded faintly. Not how you'd think. He didn't hit. But he changed things. Made me forget, made me think I was someone else sometimes. Claire fought the urge to scream. Abby continued. I started remembering last year. Little things. You. Our backyard. The lemon tree. I wrote things down, hid them. He burned them when he found them. That's when I knew I had to get out. Why now? Claire asked softly. Abby looked away. He was getting worse. Paranoid. Talking to people who weren't there. Saying he had to move me again. I knew I wouldn't survive another move. Outside, the agents were combing the woods for Benjamin Kessler. They followed blood. A trail from where he'd scraped his leg during his escape. The manhunt was full scale now, across state lines and into Canada. Claire didn't care about that anymore. Not right now. She had her daughter. That night, in a secure facility under medical care, Abby slept for the first time in a real bed in over a decade. Claire sat by her side, watching every breath. Memorizing her again. But even in sleep, Abby twitched, murmured. Don't let him take me again. Claire gripped her hand. He won't. Not ever again. The snow came hard that night, blanketing the woods of northern Maine in a silence so deep it felt sacred. The air was sharp, the cold unforgiving. Search teams trudged through the drifts with flashlights and rifles, while helicopters scanned the tree canopy from above. Bloodhounds barked faintly in the distance, tracking a scent too fresh to ignore. Benjamin Kessler was close. He was wounded, likely hypothermic, possibly delirious. But the man had survived off-grid for over a decade. No one underestimated him now. He knew how to hide, how to run, how to vanish. Yet this time, he had made one critical mistake: he'd underestimated Abby. She had slipped through his grip. And the moment Claire heard he was still in the woods, still breathing, still free, she felt a cold panic rise inside her. Because monsters didn't just disappear. They waited. Regrouped. Changed names. And they came back. At the safe house, Abby remained under protection, 2 agents stationed outside her room at all times. Despite the warmth and safety, she barely slept. She flinched at loud sounds. She refused to be alone. And whenever Claire left the room, Abby begged her not to close the door. But she was healing. Each day she remembered more. A song her mom used to hum. The smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings. The pink shoes she wore the day she vanished. Claire jotted it all down, promising herself she'd build new memories on top of the old. She asked questions only when Abby offered answers, and each small detail was a stitch in the unraveling story of her captivity. "He never let me look in mirrors," Abby said once, softly. "He said my face wasn't mine anymore." On the 3rd day after the rescue, Detective Reynolds arrived at the safe house, his face tight with urgency. They found him. Claire's breath caught. Alive? Reynolds hesitated. Yes. For now. Kessler had been discovered in an old ranger station less than 10 miles from the last sighting. He'd broken in through the back, scavenged supplies, and was trying to patch up his wounded leg when agents cornered him. He'd refused to come quietly, brandishing a knife and lunging at an officer before being shot in the shoulder. Now, he was under armed guard in a federal hospital, awaiting charges that stretched longer than a legal pad could hold: kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, child endangerment, identity fraud, and more. Reynolds looked Claire in the eye. "He asked for you." Claire's jaw tightened. "I want nothing from him. I figured. But you deserve to know, you'll be called in for trial. And when that happens, we'll need Abby's testimony, too. She's not ready. I know. We'll protect her. She'll have the best therapists, legal advocates. But Claire, it's not just about justice anymore. It's about stopping him from ever doing this again." Claire glanced through the door where Abby sat sketching with crayons, something she hadn't done since she was 6. Her daughter had aged, yes, but in many ways, she was still a child, frozen in time, trying to find herself in the ruins of memory. The next morning, Claire made the decision to see him. The hospital was a fortress: metal detectors, ID checkpoints, silent nurses who'd already heard too much. She was escorted into a sterile room with one glass wall, where Benjamin Kessler sat restrained to a bed. His face was gaunt. Beard unshaven. A bandage on his shoulder, fresh 4 lines in his arms. He looked up. And smiled. Claire didn't flinch. "You came," he rasped. She stared at him like a stranger. "You don't get to speak to me." "I saved her," he said. The words made Claire's skin crawl. "I saved her," he repeated. "From the world. From you. From everything that would have chewed her up." "You stole her life," Claire whispered. "You broke her mind. I gave her peace. I raised her better than you ever could. She was mine. She is mine." Claire leaned forward, her voice like ice. "You're going to rot in a cell. You'll die there. Alone. And every day you breathe will be a reminder that she got away." Kessler's smile faltered. "Abby remembers," Claire said. "She remembers me. And she's not scared of you anymore." She stood, walked to the door. "Tell her," Kessler called after her, voice rising, shaking. "Tell her she'll never be whole without me." Claire paused, looked back one last time. "She already is." She didn't turn around again. That night, Claire returned to the safe house. Abby was asleep on the couch, her head resting on a blanket. Claire sat beside her, gently brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. The past would never fully go away. But it would never have control again. The trial was set for spring. Kessler would face multiple life sentences. The evidence was overwhelming. The world would finally learn the full extent of what he'd done, not just to Abby, but likely to others. Investigations into similar cold cases had already begun. But for Claire, only one truth mattered now. Her daughter was safe. Alive. And home. Spring arrived with hesitant warmth, thin sunlight stretching through the windows of the safe house, melting snow on the sidewalks, the occasional bird daring to sing again. Inside, Abby took her first steps toward normalcy, though nothing about her return had been ordinary. Each day brought tiny victories. She brushed her own hair. She smiled, shyly, but genuinely, when Claire told a joke. She asked questions about the world she'd lost. Do people still use CDs? Are kids allowed to dye their hair now? Do pancakes still taste the same? Claire answered them all with patience and love, even when the answers broke her heart. Therapists visited regularly. Trauma counselors. FBI child psychologists. But Abby clung to Claire more than anyone else. She wanted stories from her early childhood, things Kessler couldn't have erased. Claire showed her old photo albums, narrated memories from birthday parties, their beach trip, the time Abby got gum in her hair and they had to cut a whole chunk out. Sometimes Abby laughed. Sometimes she cried. Often, both at once. But slowly, the light returned to her eyes. One afternoon, sitting in the grass outside the safe house, Abby asked, "What do you think I'd be like, if I hadn't been taken?" Claire hesitated, then said gently, "Exactly like you are now. Brave. Smart. Still mine." Abby looked down. "I don't know who I am yet." Claire wrapped an arm around her. "Then we'll figure it out together." The trial of Benjamin Kessler began in early May. The courtroom was sealed to protect Abby's identity, but Claire was there every day. She watched Kessler from across the aisle, gaunt, shackled, no longer smiling. His public defender tried to argue psychological instability, twisted intent, blurred lines between obsession and care. But the prosecution was brutal. They had the videos. The journal. The photographs. The shack in the woods. The shoe with the note. Claire's testimony. The drone footage. And Abby. On the third day of the trial, Abby took the stand. She wore a gray sweater and jeans. Her hands trembled slightly as she sat. The courtroom was silent. "My name is Abigail Whitmore," she said. "And for 12 years, I was kept by a man who made me believe I didn't matter." Her voice didn't waver. She described her captivity in careful detail, how he renamed her, isolated her, told her the world outside was gone, that her mother had forgotten her. How he taught her to distrust her own memories. How she wrote herself notes and buried them like breadcrumbs to stay sane. "I survived because I knew something wasn't right," she said. "And I remembered the way my mom smelled like jasmine and dish soap. I held on to that." Claire wept silently. The jury took less than 2 hours to deliver a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Benjamin Kessler was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The judge, normally restrained, called it one of the most psychologically monstrous cases of captivity and manipulation in modern history. Claire never looked at him again. After the trial, the press descended, but Claire shielded Abby from the worst of it. They moved away from Millfield, quietly, without announcement. A new city. A new house. Somewhere green and peaceful. They didn't try to recreate the past. They started something new. Abby began online school. Slowly. Then in person, part-time. She found solace in art, in sketching dreams she couldn't put into words. Claire found a therapist for herself, too, and began the painful process of grieving the 12 stolen years, even while building a future with the daughter she had back. One summer evening, Abby came into the living room holding a box. Inside were her old belongings from the day she vanished. A doll, a bracelet, and a pair of blue shoes. She picked them up, one by one. Then looked at her mom. "I think I'm ready to let some of it go." Claire reached for her hand. "Then let's do it together." They burned the bracelet in a small backyard fire. Abby watched the flame eat the leather cord, the beads popping softly. It wasn't about destruction. It was about release. That night, before bed, Abby whispered, "Do you think I'll ever feel whole?" Claire brushed her cheek. "You're not broken. You're just, becoming." And Abby smiled. It was soft. Fragile. But real. 12 years of silence, shadows, and stolen identity had not destroyed her. She had reclaimed herself. And she wasn't going back.